All right, so we're now recording, and I want to say hello to everybody and welcome back to another episode of what we like to call the Hot Car Podcast. Everyone has to get in and buckle up at times. Things get a little harrowing, funny. Today it's me, Marcus, and our guest, Sean Hicks. Hammy has the day off. But you never know. He might just chime in. You never know with that guy. He might just pop in and say something inappropriate. And
It's happened again.
Bounce back.
This happened on Tuesday, and we know it was really hot that day. Hot car. Joining us live in the Alert Center.
How long did you last in a hot car?
Facts that the heat index that day was 105 degrees. Hot car.
We don't yet know about a potential third suspect who was seen speeding away from federal agents at the scene. The whole thing had been a mystery to neighbors.
Hot car.
This is not an accident. This is pure negligence.
So, welcome to the Hot Car Podcast. Today, my guest is Sean Hicks, and he, I don't know what you would call, I've been calling you kind of a Buddhist acolyte. I don't know if that's really the right term, but welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on the show. My name is Sean Hicks, and my Dharma name is Jigten Gunpo, which means protector of everyone in the world, and I am by title Nyakpa, ordained Nyakpa, which is from a lineage of Mahasiddhas, or great yogis of Tibetan Buddhism.
Great. Thanks so much. And today we're going to talk about a number of things, including primarily this idea of the thoughts that turn the mind. So off we go.
Thank you for having me on your show.
You're welcome. That was very perfectly awkward.
Yes.
I think that people can get behind that.
Yes, and hopefully there's no pressure, but hopefully your sidekick, pops up every now and then. I'll look forward to it if he does. Well,
you say that now, but then he actually says something, and then you kind of may regret it. Yeah, that's the kind of guy he is. He prides himself on being, as inappropriate as possible at times.
Oh, okay.
Like it really is like if you know Hammy, it's going to be like a 50-50 proposition where you either love him or hate him, and neither side can tell you exactly why they feel that way.
Well, that's the great thing about these teachings I've received is that we can choose to either just accept things in the moment and not have to feel the need to push or pull on something that happens in our life.
Right. That kind of, turns to the, topic that I wanted to discuss. You put up a post a couple days ago, yesterday. I don't know exactly when it was, but, recently. And it was about Gondro and what that is.
Yeah, Nendro.
Oh, is that how you say it?
Yeah, it's the Tibetan name for it, and it means the what comes first to do. Right. What I found just in looking up what you were talking about was that it's a foundational set of Tibetan Buddhist practices that are basically foundational in the whole scheme of establishing what I guess they would call a pure mind. That's right. The four thoughts that turn the what we call it.
Four thoughts that turn the mind. Right.
Yes, and it's the first things that we're taught if we start from the bottom and work our way up the ladder.
Right. So it's maybe in opposition, perhaps, to these concepts, like just as kind of an aside, someone, specifically Alan Watts, might say something along the lines of, well, you can get really good at pushing a pebble down the middle of the street with your nose, if that's the kind of yoga or work you want to put into finding enlightenment, or you could simply just snap out of it. I found that fascinating.
And yeah, a very subject. And it's and some people are it comes more naturally with their merits and their virtues and their karma, perhaps, to do one method or the other. But in my experience, it helps to work my way towards that, being able to just kind of snap out of it.
Right. Well, my counter to that, like, specific argument kind of is that rather than doing something as silly as pushing a pebble down the middle of the street with your nose, the very act of contemplating and thinking about and acting upon snapping out of it, so to speak, is really the same work.
Would you like to elaborate a little bit?
Well, meaning that whatever practice you find that leads you to turn your mind towards, for instance, a specific spiritual path, and you reflect on this stuff, that may be the same thing as pushing a pebble down the middle of the street with your nose. In essence, it's the same yoga.
Yes, it's that's why it said that the Buddha Dharma, the Buddha taught like something like 84,000 different methods, that all that lead to the path of enlightenment or moksha, liberation. All depending on the one's personality and one's preferences and karma, you would say, actions.
Right, dealing with basically, essentially the four pursuits.
Yeah.
And those being dharma, dealing with duty and righteousness and being like forthright, artha, wealth and prosperity in the world, kama, desire and pleasure, and moksha, liberation, and those kinds of spiritual pursuits. Those, essentially are the things that all people are working towards, whether they really realize it or not.
Right. You just mentioned the four Purushartha, the four meanings of human existence, according to the yogic traditions.
Right. It's it is interesting how Buddhism being a billion strong, I suppose, in the world. I don't know. No one really knows for sure, but a giant religious spiritual philosophy that very few people really know anything about. And look at not even look at anything with suspicion or like curiosity. We just have no real understanding for an initial basis to begin with. They just hear Buddhism and they go, "Wow, what's that?"
Right. It's something each person, if they feel that their calling, they kind of have to make it their own. And and find their relationship towards it, if that is their calling, their vocation, if you will.
Right. It is interesting to take the perspective of a Buddhist philosophy and look out upon the world and then recognize that, like I kind of said earlier, everybody else kind of doing the same thing, pursuing the same kinds of universal goals, and you tell yourself, oh, these people are all Buddhists too, they just don't know it.
Yeah, that's the integration, the integrative mindset towards it, about how I found this subject very fascinating, and I've been looking towards working towards the same path of mindset that you're talking about right here.
Right. It's really to ponder and contemplate that in itself is very consciousness raising, and that's kind of the whole idea of, like, all of these conversations that we have, whether they're serious stories about the troubled teen industry, or something more silly, funny stories, or something more philosophically and intriguing, like this kind of thing. It all plays into the role of expanding people's ideas about what's
what it means to be human.
What it means to be human, and not to say that everyone looking out and saying, "Oh, everyone's a Buddhist," because I don't follow these practices with any rigor. I may understand some of the concepts, and then I find applications in my life that they may apply to if I'm even concentrating and looking at what's going on. Like, if I even am thinking about these four pursuits in a meaningful way at any given time, when in fact a lot of people aren't. That's kind of the difference, I think, in some ways.
Yes, and that's the first thought that turns the mind in my tradition, that we contemplate, is the meaning of being human.
Right.
And it's that effort, and the effort towards effortlessness that makes a difference somehow. It's beyond words sometimes.
Sure.
We can try talking about it, but and that may point out for some people, but until the person experiences it for themselves. Which is the whole point of each method, is for someone to feel the want, if you will, to pick it up and try it out.
Right. And I think that people do experience this kind of thing all the time, and either fail to recognize what's going on or miss those moments. It's I equate it kind of to the idea, at least from an outside perspective, of seeing someone doing something like, for instance, playing a guitar or singing, and to us as observers, what they're doing seems somehow effortless, even though you intellectually may understand that, no, that took thousands and thousands of hours of rehearsal and practice and learning. We all do that. We all have these innate qualities that kind of transcend time and space, those flow moments I'm talking about.
Yes, the flow mindset, the mind state of flowness.
Right. So to be able to recognize and capture those moments and, really kind of manifest that kind of situation is really valuable. To learn you can learn how to do that.
Yes, and we don't sometimes when we're stuck in that observer's mindset, we get comfortable in just being in the observer rather than being that one in the flow state himself, which is you have to forget that you're putting on an act, you're putting on a performance, and you forget that you're doing it for other people and just do it for yourself.
Right, and that's actually really a great analogy for that human experience itself. It's we're all really, I mean, we're born really putting on a show from the very beginning. I mean, beforehand. I mean, talk about like making an entrance. I mean, we're in someone's belly, bulging them out, as we prepare to make our grand entrance onto the world stage. I mean, it's absurd. And then how we go out is also equally ridiculous. I mean, and why do we do all this stuff, and why is it all so ceremonial and meaningful and like wondrous? Well, because we choose to keep forgetting. We choose to keep forgetting that we're on this wheel, and because if we remembered everything, things would get incredibly boring, I think. Really. So yeah, we're all putting on a big show, whether you know it or not. When you walk out onto the street, you're on stage, baby.
Yeah. It's a matter of like how we want to perform.
Right. How,
freedom.
What story do you want to tell? What performance are you putting on? What does it mean to
you?
What are you trying to share with other people? Are you consciously even considering what you're sharing with other people?
Instead of just being on autopilot the whole time.
Right. Well, I mean, that's a choice too.
It is.
I mean, that really is that, really that flow state in essence, whether it's, you find yourself, staring at a wall for 30 seconds while your mind goes blank, or you're Aubrey, the Roseburg juggler, who thrills people by walking up and down the boulevard all day, juggling balls and bowling pins, and people get totally entranced. So there is something to that observational state that can connect with, whatever is, going on in the world. Ram Dass used to give a lot of like open air lectures, and there was always ambient surrounding noise. And one time, a bunch of sirens went by, and he started talking.
Hello?
He started talking about how they could be so annoying, but you could also instead get into it and siren right along with the sirens as they go by in some kind of resonance with the world, regardless. Like they're all woo, right along with these trucks. Yes, really.
Yes,
really, really amazing, mindful exercise is what I'm saying. To get into the world.
I think what you're describing to my perspective is finding the extraordinary in the ordinary, being able to enjoy the moment as a precious human rebirth. We're in the middle of that pain and pleasure, happiness and suffering. As humans, we fall in the middle category of all of it, And so being able to ride with it and flow with it is real magical thing, and it's what one of my lamas, Lama Lena, has mentioned is a difference between, in her description, difference between humans and Homo sapiens, if you will.
Uh-huh.
Homo sapiens, our species on Earth, and humans, that category that may fall for our Earth species, as well as other humans in that category on other planets.
Right. That's amazing. Right.
Yeah, because it's in Buddhism they cover what science is just starting to delve into, that many worlds hypothesis.
Yes. That well, you're basically talking about the Heisenberg uncertainty principle.
Yeah.
Right. Everything is and isn't at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's amazingly, at least at the quantum level, that has more or less been shown to be viable because of the fact that you have a choice. You can either know particle's position and not know its energy, or you can understand the particle's energy and not know where it is.
Mm-hmm.
Right, at the same time. That's and it doesn't really seem to apply to the macro world. There's a lot of pretenders out there who try to describe these things as using a lot of mumbo jumbo pseudo intellectual sciencey type words, but the truth of it is that there's a lot of weird stuff going on, and the paths that we choose to take comes down in a lot of cases to the question about whether or not we really even have free will.
To me, the whole point of these traditions, these wisdom traditions, is to kind of explore and delve into this free will, so that that's the point of the great the fourth Purushartha, moksha, liberation or enlightenment, if you will. That's the point of freedom, of being able to develop one's free will and in the pursuit of freedom itself.
Right. But the question, I think, for me remains whether or not it's free will, however you want to define that, or is it a situation where things are determined and we have particular choices that we must make within those circumstances.
I see what's going on here, and it goes beyond words. It goes beyond. That's exactly the whole point. It goes beyond a duality of the universe.
That's right. Exactly. That's the idea of the many worlds. Is that okay? Things are the way they are, and they've been going along, and then they get to you. Like everything, we're very much the tip of the spear as humanity. I mean, there have been approximately 100 billion people who've lived and died on the planet since people have been around, right? There are approximately 8.5 billion that are currently living. That's less than 10% of the entire population that ever existed. We are at the very forefront of everything, and everything behind us has led us to this point, whether we like it or not. So the future only holds particular choices that we're able to make, and they're very few. There's only a very narrow set of circumstances that we can operate in. And that most of that has to do with our very existence.
It's a dance.
Yeah, right. Long pause, too. Right. So, because you start thinking about that, and you're like, okay, wait a minute. I use a Stoic practice. I do it pretty daily, and I think other people do it too without realizing what they're doing and don't finish. And this is what I mean. Usually when I, wake up as a kind of a ritual, I like to contemplate all of the most horrible things that could possibly happen. And maybe even go through a few of those scenarios in my head and kind of resolve it, and then put it out of my mind and say, well, I guess that's the worst that could happen. So anything else, that I can't predict or know about, or is just going to have to be dealt with whenever that shows up. And
right, and that's the very practical, and you just summed up the other two, the second and third Nendro thoughts too that turn the mind, the impermanence and the meaning of suffering.
Right, sometimes I semi-jokingly, in essence, I guess, ask yourself, your partner, if you have a partner in life, contemplate the idea of, okay, let's pretend that suddenly I don't exist. What are you going to do? Or suddenly my favorite person in the world doesn't exist. What am I going to do? Think about it. And then think about what you really are going to do. Because that eventually will come true. All relationships are impermanent. So it's really important to recognize those relationships while they actually exist.
And yet, in this world we live in, sometimes relationships with other people are as old that truly exists, and from one perspective.
Right, like this ongoing chain, of relationships that really never ends.
Right, because no man's an island.
Right, and we're all cousins.
Yeah.
At least, I think the idea is that we're all at least 50th cousins on the planet, everybody. And much of us are much closer. Like, say, in the United States, we all may be like 10th or 15th cousins to each other. Cousins are the ones who really mess up the family tree. Cousins are the ones who mess up the family tree. You know what I'm saying? Because if it wasn't for cousins, family trees would be very straight and narrow. Because they would just branch out like a pyramid, essentially. But when you get cousins involved, that just throws everything way off. But it provides all of this diversity of genetic diversity, important, we don't want to turn into cheetahs. They're all basically genetically identical.
Oh.
Yeah. Very fragile because they have interbred so much that they're all the same. Yeah, pretty interesting stuff. We don't, we want to avoid that. So cousins, yeah.
Yeah, we had Neanderthals and we had Denisovans on Earth that we could mingle with and provide new genetic material with.
Right. There are a few people who have Neanderthal genetics. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super rare, but it does exist.
And that provides, that provides some of that variety in life.
Well, it also really. Sorry, you broke up a bit.
Oh yeah, that provides some of that spice in life that you were talking about, that we need in order to not get cornered and to not put baby in the corner.
Right. It also shows that tie between us and all of these other species, especially all the other apes. And then you look at dolphins, and those are the two big ones. Like as far as like longer lived species that may take our place. Ravens, crows, those birds in particular, and then octopus, but they just don't live long enough. Their lifespans are too short to really get a grip on like society in a sense because of the way they live, where when it's time to give birth to the baby octopus, mom just anchors herself in a rock and doesn't move to protect the babies, but then also doesn't eat and then withers away. It's all very challenging to create a society based on those kinds of living conditions.
But then how do you define a society too? That's the trick of it, isn't it?
Right. I think it has to do, a lot of it, I guess, has to do with, long memory. That's really interesting. Like, what does that really mean? Like, because we have this concept where you think, oh, of course, it's just a bunch of people all doing things together. Well, no, not necessarily. It's a group. I mean, what's a society? I mean, we can, look up the definition, because who's looked up the definition of society lately? Not I. I'm gonna give it a shot. Just because I'm curious. That's it.
I took while you look it up, I'll just fill the void with a little moment of I back a few years ago, I took an online college course on anthropology. That's what it was, anthropology.
Yeah.
And we researched like Neanderthals and Denisovans and ancient Homo sapiens, the ancients.
Right.
And it's interesting what they know about Neanderthals and how they lived from way back in the day. They had tools, but they were more spread out than Homo sapiens were or are today.
Yeah,
we are, one of our strengths as Homo sapiens is we network much more frequently, and we have tighter, bigger networks than Neanderthals did.
Yeah, that's true. And I pulled up the Wikipedia society page, and it's what of course it is. It's a group of individuals in a persistent social interaction or large social group sharing the same territory, typically subject to the same political authority, that kind of thing, social relationships, culture, institutions. But what you just said made me think about the really interesting phenomenon of ants, right? Like a single ant is totally worthless. Like just dumb, doesn't know where he's going, doesn't know anything. No chemical signals to pick up because there aren't any other ants around, just wandering around, lost, destined to die in the wilderness. But you get 10,000 ants altogether, and suddenly they develop what could be considered to be a brain, a fully functioning system where every ant has a particular role based upon what the next ant is doing next to them, and they can do these incredible things. Whereas that's a society. I mean, we're similar in the sense that, you know, no man is an island, and left to our own devices, we're not very effective. You turn into a samana. Mm-hmm. Right. You turn into a wandering ascetic monk with a whole...
That's one of the things about ancient societies, like ancient India, and maybe even possibly modern India. For all I know, I haven't been there, but is that over in the East, traditionally they support their ascetic or just hermetic monks and yogis. Like you can donate food. You can go up there and give them support with food or donations, and to help support them in their work. And even though it looks like to us who keep busyness a daily thing, to them it looks like they're not doing much, but they're really putting in a work to come up with realizations and put in the long-term enlightenment to bring back to the rest of society. But they were supported by society in order to do that, and then with the hopes that they'll come back to society and give us their insights, their realizations.
Right. It's it seems. And then it's hard to articulate. And then you look at what we would consider to be our institutions, the Western Judeo-Christian institutions, especially with Christian churches and the whole concept of not the church necessarily supporting the adherents, but the adherents supporting the church. And it just makes you wonder, well, wait a second. It's almost flipped.
Yeah.
You would, right? Because in a certain situation, the acolyte or seeker would be approaching the, I guess in quotes, the institution, or the leader, and seeking, I don't know. It's interesting.
It's very interesting subject, and in the ancient Christian days, some practitioners called the Gnostic Christians, they helped invert the tradition, so it's just the other way around. They go back to being, practicing hermits again, and
right.
But the Catholics, they kind of opposed that once they formed and got together their big organization, and then and then from there we have Protestant Christians, which is what we're more familiar with, right, in the Western.
Sure.
And at least in America.
Right. I mean, the Catholic Church is so big. Most Christians on the planet are Catholic, but the thing is they've hoarded so much wealth that, and at the same time, they're supposed to be known as an institution for all of this, charitable, these charitable acts, and which is true. They could essentially support their whole congregation with the wealth they have accumulated over the centuries, and yet, what happened instead was shame and scandal, and this Pope is interesting too, because he's he's like, hey, sex feels good. That's funny. Just for the Pope to be like, hey, that's what it's there for. pretty funny.
Yeah, and it's you just hit a couple of the Purusharthas, the meanings of being human. Artha, the wealth accumulation, and kama, the pleasure and love.
Right.
If you focus too much on one or the other, you get to the point where, if you focus too much on artha, on accumulating wealth, you could potentially give back great wealth to the other people in need, or you could go to the extreme and you could be a hoarder.
Sure, and that's a fascinating human attribute, that the idea of hoarding wealth. Sometimes you see it just in little things like we go to the grocery store and buy $100 worth of food, and then leave the grocery store feeling bad because we no longer have the $100, but not recognizing that we just changed the shape of our wealth, into something that we can actually use. But people get regretful about it. It's fascinating. It leads to this idea of people wanting to hoard things, not just money, but anything. I don't know where that comes from exactly. If it's ancient, survival technique.
Yeah. There's one difference between survival and surviving and thriving, and that's something psychologists are always studying too. Is how we can get stuck in this survival instinct rather than thriving. We get stuck in that comfort or striving for comfort, and we get so obsessed about it or we get so focused on just trying to get, being. How do I articulate this? Do you understand? Yeah, you probably understand what I'm saying.
It seems to be more about this idea of being driven by fear, fear of loss of whatever it is that you desire. So you better get it all.
Right, and being driven by fear is a terrible thing. It's driven me in the past, and it's you have to be brave, and but it's a growing curve.
Oh, definitely. Fear is it's scary, and then people say, well, how can I lose that fear and worry in my life? And I don't know. I tend not to worry too much. I've learned to recognize the idea that it's important to live as much of the time in the present tense, right? Like right now.
And then we take in joy for what we have in this very moment. That's what you're saying.
Right, because if there's a situation that needs to be handled in the moment, generally speaking, people do. Especially depending on how pressing that situation might be to whatever their welfare is. That there's a range there of whether or not people choose to act on impulses or things that are simple as a phone call, for instance. Well, you can either choose to answer it or not. It's not anything to necessarily worry about. What happens if you get the phone call, hang up, and then worry about it? Or you could get the phone call, answer it, and be in the moment, whatever that moment might be, but the fear and the worry part is to me it all comes down to the old analogy of whether or not the rustling in the grass is the wind or a tiger.
You don't really know, but it's best to
It's probably best to leave. And then once you're out of that situation, you're no longer worried about whether or not it was actually the wind or a tiger. You don't need to know. You're not there anymore. Then you may later find out. The thing is you may never know, because it was actually both. It was both. Before you looked, it was the wind. It was also a tiger. And you can't go back to find out, because if the wind is still blowing and the grass is still moving and you don't see a tiger, that still doesn't mean it wasn't there when we thought it might be.
Yes, that's the difference between having that mindset of either or, just, thinking and distinguishing everything, or, and both, and mindset, and where you're accepting of every phenomena and yet nothing at the same time.
Right. You know what? And I think
you don't have to know everything. You just have to know what you're doing this very moment.
I think
most suffering is in our mind.
Oh, well, even the pain that we feel, even the real physical pain that we feel, is really all generated in our mind. I mean, it's real. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that people are imagining their pain, but we kind of are imagining our pain. Which is also just, like, it just makes you say, what in the world is going on here? Like, how is that both true and not true at the same time? We're not,
Yeah.
You don't go around saying, oh, you're just imagining that you're sick. But in essence, we kind of are just imagining that we're sick. I mean, it's not the virus. It's not really the virus that's messing us up. It's all our reactions to the foreign body inside of us that causing this, like, eruption of immune cells and white blood cells that go on the attack and just, like, raise our temperature and cause all kinds of inflammation because there's a war going on inside of us that we have nothing to do with. Like, we're like, this isn't even, look, guys, this isn't even my conflict. Like, personally, like, like Mr. Virus guy, I think you should leave. But also, my guys, like, can't you figure out a different way to do this? Because you're going to kill me at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Disease. It's a trip. It's just like, because, right? It's like, oh, wait. Oh, like.
And inflammation and stress are killers, at least in extremes. But so can be comfort, too.
Yeah. All that extra, like, physical stress on your body that, like, mental stress creates, that's definitely real. And yeah, it'll get you.
And yet we can dance with a limited amount of stress. We can kind of dance, and there's a good amount of stress called eustress. Have you heard of it?
Probably a while ago, but what is that?
Eustress is when you have a minimal amount of stress, but it's still existing, and it's healthy, it's beneficial, it is good for us. It helps us grow and get that growth mindset, and it's being proven empirically that we're healthy with a limited amount of stress. Not so much that we have this high stress, and not so much that we're just no stress at all, but we've, as Homo sapiens, as humans, we're in bodies that are used to being active. So we're used to being out and exposed to the elements. Right. So a certain amount of exposure to the elements of eustress is actually healthy for us.
Right. It's again, it sounds like really the same concept as muscle building, in the fact that in order to gain strength, you need to actually damage yourself by working out. You're creating small micro tears in your muscles that are rehealing and basically growing new material.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, there's always some of that in every creative process. Is the idea of tearing something else down to build something new, and hopefully that's the kind of thing that I want to do with this. Balancing between something profound and something funny and everything in between, because laughter and tears are some of the best kind of stress that we can put our bodies through. They both bring back balance physiologically, like in a homeostasis sense, where our systems get kind of reset, especially with crying. It kind of cleans out the whole body in a sense, and it's like a little reset button. Very healthy.
Yes, we don't always enjoy it in the moment, but yet it helps. It's the healthy human experience.
Well, you can bring people to tears with laughter as well, and that counts.
Yes, it's just as long as you don't get stuck in. Just as long as we don't get stuck with the idea of being happy like all the time, because that's not realistic either.
No, because if everything is wonderful, then nothing is wonderful. Like, people need to realize that too. Like, super important.
Yeah.
There's a reason that we have, peaks and troughs. There's a reason that waves are built the way they are. Look, I don't know if you've ever seen Long Beach in California,
No.
but they put up seawalls out, in the bay, which stopped all the wave action, and it's a terrible beach now. I mean, and the excuse is that, we don't want the waves to damage, like, the harbor and stuff like that, and that's not true. The LA harbor doesn't have that, and they do just fine. So yeah, that's the analogy. Is like, don't block your highs and your lows. Like, recognize them, appreciate what's going on. You can pull yourself out of some depressive states by simply recognizing that you're in a depressed state, telling someone else that, they'll empathize. Suddenly everyone's feeling better. That's really effective. Because if you're feeling weird, just go tell somebody about it, and they'll probably go, oh, well, that makes sense. Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't worry. No worries.
It's as simple as that.
Just snap out of it. That's the whole point.
Well, yeah. For some people, it's easier to snap out of it than others. My father,
yes, indeed.
He identifies. He has chronic depression, and he identifies with that chronic depression, for life, because he was told he would have it for life. So he identifies with that, and he's become, he's.
That gives him something, though. That's interesting, because that actually will give him something, some form of worth, by saying, "Hey, that's me. I'm that guy." And by recognizing that, you can live there. People can live there. You can live in a state of total goofiness too. Like,
the sad Buddha.
Right, the sad Buddha.
Yeah, it reminds me of a story there was a short story that the Human Kindness Foundation published in a book of theirs. And it's called The Sad. Long story short, he becomes known as the Sad Buddha.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me.
All right, buddy.
Well, it's happened again.
This happened on Tuesday, and we know it was really hot that day.
It's hot.
car. Joining us live in the Alert Center.
How long did you last in a hot car?
Facts that the heat index that day was 105 degrees.
We don't yet know about a potential third suspect who was seen speeding away from federal agents at the scene. The whole thing had been a mystery to neighbors.
This is not an accident. This is pure negligence.